Okay, boys and girls, we're going to be looking at our next chapter. Chapter 5, Viral Structure and Multiplication. Here we're going to be discussing what a virus actually is. You heard it in the news, you see it in the news, you're bombarded with it right now, the whole COVID thing. So let's talk about what a virus such as the COVID-19 virus actually is. Keep in mind, viruses are not quote unquote living things. To be a living thing, a living cell, cytoplasmic membrane, have a genome, DNA, enzymes that the cell utilizes for metabolism, to repair itself, to replicate itself. Viruses have none of that. Viruses, they are, basically inanimate things. They are a piece or a couple of pieces of DNA or RNA wrapped by proteins. And it may have a membrane wrapped around it, but depends on the species, the strain. No metabolism whatsoever. They have to go back, late 1800s, to the lab of Louis Pasteur. After the whole pasteurization thing and all the gooseneck flask experiments, Pasteur started looking at certain diseases, human diseases. One of the human diseases he studied was rabies. He found that if he used filters with smaller and smaller and smaller holes, he could filter out cell particles from infected tissues. He could filter out any bacteria that may be there. And what was left were things that were too small to see in a microscope, too small to detect, but could still pass on rabies. Because we now know in modern day medicine, rabies is caused by a virus, the rabies virus. Pasteur theorized that this had to be caused by something that was smaller than the bacteria, too small to see with a microscope. He coined the term virus. We use it to this day. It wasn't until a few decades later that we came up, where researchers came up with proof that viruses are there and viruses cause infection. Is the work of Ivan Vosky and Biernik. They were studying a blight in tobacco. They took some tobacco leaves, ground them out, centrifuged out large chunks, and then using smaller and smaller filters, just like Pasteur did, they were able to filter out almost everything. They were able to centrifuge out organelles and all of this. And still the fluid that was left, when injected into other plants, when exposed to other plants, caused the same disease. They were able to find proteins and chunk of genome that wasn't plant. That they found a virus that caused a disease, tobacco mosaic virus. It wasn't until a bit later that Loeffler and Frosch were able to show that some mammalian diseases can also be caused by viruses. They study what's referred to as foot and mouth disease, and actually it sounds exactly what it is. Get sores mouth and on the hooves, or for us humans, on our feet. Sores and mottled, and really weird things happen. Turns out it's a virus. So when you look at the properties of virus, I've alluded to it, but these things are truly parasitic. They only have a metabolism when they're infecting another cell. Whether it's bacterial, protozoa, fungal, plants, animals, every living thing on this planet has at least one virus that can infect it. We think that, the viruses, they're nothing more than a piece of genome, DNA or RNA, we now know, wrapped by some proteins. That may or may not then be wrapped by a piece of a membrane taken from the host cell. Depends on which species, which strain of viruses you're talking about. Now, I've mentioned in previous lectures, as scientists, we like to group like with like. That's what the whole idea of classification is. You take a bunch of things that are like and you put them in this group. Then you take that group and you separate it out into smaller and smaller groups. Well, we do the same thing with viruses. We do it by the 4 things listed here: shape, genome, source, origin. Now, what does that mean? Well, what shape? As we're going to see over the next couple of sections, different geometric shapes correspond to different types of viruses. Genome, DNA, RNA, as I've said previously. Linear, segmented. Sense, nonsense. And I'll tell you more about that in a later. What source? Where is it coming from? Is it lung? Is it, central nervous system? Is it a skin? Origin? Where on the planet? West Nile virus, Rabies virus, or not Rabies virus, West Nile virus, St. Louis encephalitis, Ebola,